This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of July 28th, 2024. Content authenticity warning: 95% of this newsletter is generated by me, the human. You will see AI outputs from Google Gemini and Google Notebook LM in the opening section and in the live demo in the video. There's a link at the top of the newsletter to learn why this kind of disclosure is a good idea and might be required for anyone doing business in any capacity with the EU in the near future. What's on my mind this week? Generative AI for advanced citizenship. Now, I will preface this message by saying we will be tangentially talking about politics, particularly local politics. So if that's a subject you just want absolutely no part of, totally respect that. Pass on this issue, come back next week. If you are interested in the application of AI for things like citizenship and legislation and politics, let's continue. In this week's issue, let's talk about a very different use case for generative AI, one that people overlook, one that people don't realize is possible, one that is absolutely vital: advanced citizenship. First, what do I mean by advanced citizenship? Many of us do our required or our encouraged duty as citizens, from voting to jury duty, participating in the politics of our preferred points of view. Very few of us participate in the operation and activation of the governments that we support, of the officials that we elect. It's kind of like attending the grand opening of a park and then we never set foot again for years, or hiring a new employee and we just don't manage them for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever, and they're like, hey, at the end of 4 years, what you been doing for the last 4 years? Obviously that can lead to less good outcomes. For example, suppose a new law is proposed or put on the books. How often do you personally check out new pending legislation in your country, in your province or state, in your city, to see what it says, to see what's being proposed? I'll be honest, I, in the past, have rarely done so because A, law is not a strength of mine, and it's not something I specialize in, and B, it's really boring. Those same I'm going to insult myself here. I'm going to call myself out here. Those same proposed and actual laws impact us every day in every part of our lives. They set our tax rates. They set our water bill rates. They tell us what we may and may not do. They govern our health, our education, our wealth, even what we can and can't do with our own bodies. And so, why wouldn't we pay more attention to them? Well, because they're really, really boring, right? They're onerous to read. They're usually in arcane formats. They're dry. They're technical. They're boring. They're not exciting, and yet they have such an outsized effect on us. This is true regardless of where you are. Laws exist in every nation, even if they're enforced differently, even if the government is different and how it operates. Laws are laws. They exist and they have an impact on our lives. We just don't pay attention to it. What if it didn't have to be that way? What if we could know the impact of laws, the impact of proposed laws before they happen? What if we could take action before proposed legislation becomes law? And at least for folks who live in places where you have democratically elected governments, possibly even participate in the making of the law, in the shaping of the law itself. Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, it would. So let's talk about AI's contribution. How does generative AI play a role in this? Well, generative AI, large language models in particular, like the ones that power ChatGPT and many other tools, they're good at creating stuff, but they're better at processing the data you already have. One of the bedrock truths of language models is that the more data you bring to the party, the less they're inclined to make things up, because they don't have to do any of the work to bring words out of their long-term memory, possibly incorrectly. Think of a large language model like a library, right? You go to the library and they ask for a book, but you're not as precise as you could be. And you say, I'd like a book about the joy of something. And the librarian does their best, and they bring back what they think it is you asked for. They bring back the joy of sex, and you're like, I was actually thinking about the joy of cooking, but you weren't clear. The librarian didn't get it right because you weren't clear. Now, suppose you went to the library and asked the librarian for a book just like the one you brought with you. You brought in a copy of The Joy of Cooking. The librarian instantly opens it up, reads the entire book you just brought, and finds a book that's the closest match in the library. Like, oh, you brought in The Joy of Cooking. You probably are going to like Alton Brown's I'm Just Here for the Food, right? And you get a much closer result when the librarian doesn't have to really ask you detailed questions to find what you're looking for. You just give the book over, and the librarian does the work and finds the book that's closest to it. Conceptually, that's what happens in a large language model. When you provide data to a language model, it reads through everything you provide it and tends to use that information first before relying on its own long-term memory, which may be less current, less reliable, have some stuff in its training data that was factually untrue. The more data you provide, the less it has to look up. So how does this advance our citizenship skills? If we provide pending or actual legislation to a language model, we can ask it pointed questions, questions we might not necessarily be able to quickly find answers to ourselves. More important, today's large foundational models, like the ones that power ChatGPT, Anthropic Claude, Google Gemini, Meta's Llama, Mistral's large model, they're very fluent at reading and interpreting law, explaining it to us really, really well. So, what sorts of questions might we want to ask? Well, anything that concerns you. Maybe you've got some city regulations and you're like, you know what? I'm not sure that my city's laws are serving me well, or maybe I don't even know what laws apply to me. So let's look at an example. We're gonna flip over here into example mode. I'm gonna bring up my browser here. You would probably start by writing a real long prompt that describes who you are, what interests you have, what kind of business or work you do, kind of like a biography of yourself, and the things that you care about. I have one that I wrote, which is just one gigantic blob of all sorts of things. Like, I believe in science, for example. I believe in data. I believe in analysis. Right? Huge surprise if you know me. I believe in things like, bodily autonomy, as long as it's not hurting anyone else. I believe that in general, it's a good idea to reduce poverty, right? And if you have to increase taxes, particularly on corporations, to do that, that's not a bad thing. So I have this really long block of stuff. I'm going to paste this into a language model, and then I'm going to have it tell me what things in my city's ordinances might have impacted me. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start by saying, today we're going to analyze the city of Framingham's ordinances. I'd like to know which ordinances should concern me the most or impact my life. Now, I'm going to attach the city's regulatory ordinances. This is a huge, big chunk of information about how the city is supposed to work. And I'm going to paste in that giant wall of text. Now, we'll note here the ordinances are 247,000 tokens. That is about 180,000 words. This is why citizens don't, dig deeply into law, because this is a substantial amount of text. I do want to specify in the prompt, be sure as you return your analysis to return specific citations and verbatims cited by chapter and section. So I'm not only telling the model what to do and providing it lots and lots of data, I'm telling it, I don't want you to make things up. So I want you to tell me where you got the information from. And the model's going to do a much better job of that. So here we have Framingham ordinances that impact me. We have high impact ordinances, sustainability and climate change. This ordinance directly supports your interest in sustainability, particularly for homeowners. It says renovations have to comply with those standards. There's a chapter 419 waste management, chapter 427 wetlands protection, family and inclusivity, licensing your dog. So I can take a look at all of these regulations and understand what applies to me personally. If I wanted to put in more information about Trust Insights, my company, I would put a whole bunch about that and say, now go through my city's ordinances, my state's ordinances, my country's ordinances, and tell me what things apply to me. And as long as it can fit within the model's short-term memory, it can come up with really, really good detailed information. Now, we're done here. The city has LLM has spit out all the relevant ordinances that apply to me. One of the things that you want to do is you want to have in another window, you want to have the actual documentation up so that you can validate that the machine is or is not making things up, right? So if it can't even get, for example, chapter and section numbers correct, then of course you know that it's not reliable. So you want to do that test. You want to have the real text up alongside, and then you'd want to be able to cross validate it, make sure that it's not lying to you. If you're doing something that's super high risk, there's a great tool from Google called Notebook LM. And this doesn't give you as much flexibility in terms of the questions you can answer. But what it does do that's unique is it will not answer a question if it does not have the info. But for today's exercise, I want to use the main Gemini model. One of my favorite questions to ask is about unintended consequences. Given a piece of legislation, I will ask a model to infer what some of the second or third order effects could be, what the unintended consequences of a piece of legislation could be. So let's go ahead and let's ask it about the dog laws. I think that's an easy one to look at. So what I've done is I said, let's take a look at the second order effects of the ordinances around Article 1, Section 206, dog ownership. Read through the ordinance and explain what the second order effects of this chapter could be. Then, based on your analysis of the second order effects, outline what some of the unintended consequences of ordinances around dogs could be. So what it comes up with, it says, here's a breakdown of the second order effects. Increased costs for dog owners. Annual licensing fees and potential fines create a financial burden on dog owners. Emphasis on enforcement and punishment. The ordinance focuses on apprehending and impounding dogs found at large and muzzling or confining those deemed dangerous. Could strain animal control resources, increase fear and anxiety among dog owners. Limited flexibility and discretion. Has rigid requirements of leash length and restrictions on dog behavior. Hinders responsible dog ownership practices or discourages dog-friendly spaces. Unintended consequences: rise in abandoned dogs, increased conflict between dog owners and non-dog owners, decreased opportunities for dog socialization and training, rise in underground dog breeding and ownership. Now, those are not all likely going to happen, but they could be. And here's some ways to mitigate that: tiered licensing fees based on income, increased community education, designated off-leash areas, which we do have a dog park now, and collaboration with animal welfare organizations. So from just this one section of the city's ordinances, we can ask and start to understand what some of the unintended consequences could be. What would be the second order impacts be? How would we know what might happen? There's a famous case of disability laws and anti-discrimination disability laws that occurred, I want to say it was in the 1990s. It was an episode of Freakonomics I listened to recently. And one of the unintended consequences of the disability law was it reduced the hiring of people with disabilities, as opposed to increasing access, because what it did was the clauses in the act about reasonable accommodation for people with disability was perceived by business owners as so onerous, they just didn't hire people who were disabled. And so the law had the unintended consequence of doing the opposite of what it was supposed to do. And so asking language models, hey, what could go wrong in this law? How could this law have consequences we can't foresee, is a super powerful tool, right? It's a super powerful and very effective way to think through what could go wrong. This is important for legislators, politicians, and government officials, but it's equally important for citizens, because I guarantee as legislators are writing these laws and rules and ordinances, they may not be thinking about these kinds of things. They may not have an awareness that what they're saying could have unintended consequences. Now, another question that I will ask frequently is, how could a law be misused? I'll ask the model, assume that an unethical government official is in office. Maybe we elected the village idiot for a mayor, right? How could that government official use the law to their own benefit, or to do harm, or to further marginalize already vulnerable populations? You'd be surprised at some of the answers, ways laws that are poorly written can be misused. The last area is where generative AI really shines. When you've identified problems, you say, how do we fix this? Right? What recommendations could you make? It's not enough to complain about something. To affect change, we have to do something. We have to take action. And these tools can help us do that. Let's look at another example. I'm gonna focus on that dog law. And let's take a look at just the nuisance portion. So which is, if I go back to my disturbance of the peace. So what I did was I asked Gemini, let's take a look Specifically, Article 1, Chapter 206, assume an unethical mayor has been elected to lead the city. The mayor is interested in preserving Framingham's heritage, which is a coded way of saying they want the city to be composed of a certain type of people. They want to discourage immigration, particularly of we have a lot of Brazilian and Latin American expatriates living here, and their food is awesome. There are people in the city who don't like that. How could a hypothetical, unethical politician misuse the dog laws to achieve this discriminatory outcome? That's a real pointed question. What does Gemini come up with? It says, even seemingly innocuous uh, ordinances like dog licensing laws can be misused for discriminatory purposes in the hands of an unethical politician. Here's how a mayor interested in discouraging immigration could manipulate this law. Right, selective enforcement and harassment targeting specific breeds of dog, increased patrols, lowering the bar for nuisance complaints, arbitrary application of dangerous dog designations, language barriers and cultural misunderstanding, issuing citations for unintentional violations, misinterpreting cultural practices as nuisances, um, financial burdens, increasing licensing fees, or creating complex licensing procedures for people with limited English proficiency, limiting access to resources, propaganda and public perception, linking dog ownership to unwanted demographics, highlighting violations in targeted communities. You could see this one pretty seemingly innocuous set of regulations could be weaponized against other people because of the way it's written. It's just not written particularly well. So when you have something like that, what do? Well, you ask Gemini, let's fix it. Let's fix this. So what I said to Gemini was, great. I'd like you to especially take a look at the nuisance and complaints portion of the city's ordinances, especially noise complaints. How could Article 1, Sections 206-1 and Section 206-2 be rewritten to close these loopholes and ensure fair, equitable, and just application of the city's dog nuisance laws? For context, let's go back and look at these. Here's Section 1, no person shall own or keep in the city any dog which by barking, biting, or howling in any other manner disturbs the quiet of any person for a prolonged period, such that a reasonable person would find such behavior disruptive to one's quiet and peaceful enjoyment. That's super vague. What's a reasonable person? We don't have reasonable people anymore. What's quiet, right? What's a prolonged period? None of these things are defined. Section 206-2, if any person shall make a complaint in writing to the chief of police of the city that any dog owned or harbored within its jurisdiction is a nuisance or dangerous dog by reason of vicious disposition or excessive barking or other disturbance, the hearing authority shall investigate or cause the investigation of the complaint, including an examination under oath of the complainant at a public hearing in the municipality to determine whether the dog is a nuisance or a dangerous dog. Again, pretty darn vague, right? What is a nuisance? What is a dangerous dog? What is a vicious disposition? What is excessive barking? None of this is defined, and that's how an unethical government official could take advantage of these things to behave in a discriminatory way. So, with that in mind, what does Gemini say? Gemini says, let's rewrite that. Here's the current issues, proposed revisions, Section 206-1, objective standards, frequency and duration, decibel level, contextual factors. So it revises to say, no person shall own or keep in the city any dog which by barking disturbs the quiet of any person. Excessive barking shall be defined as barking exceeding 70 decibels for a continuous period of 10 minutes or more, or more than 15 cumulative minutes within a 1 hour period between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. This provision shall not apply to barking in response to a perceived threat or intruder, or barking during brief periods of play or excitement, or barking documented by a veterinarian as being due to medical or behavioral issues. That's a lot more clear. That will cut down on spurious complaints, because if you were a police officer sent to enforce it, say, well, you got to show me the decibel meter, right? You show me the app on your phone that says this dog's been at 70 decibels for 15 minutes or more. Section 202, the require specific evidence, standardized investigation process, mediation, and education. Here's the revised. Any person makes a complaint, nuisance by reason of barking, the hearing authority shall investigate the complaint. To be considered valid, a complaint must include detailed records of barking incidents, including dates, times, and durations, decibel meter readings when applicable, and statements from neighbors or other witnesses corroborating the complaint. The hearing authority shall respond to the complaints within 48 hours and utilize objective measures such as decibel meter readings to evaluate noise complaints. The hearing authority shall prioritize mediation and education as primary responses to nuisance complaints, seeking to resolve issues amicably before resorting to fines or penalties. You can see what's being done here. right? What's being done here is we're defining these things. We're closing the loopholes, right? That level of specificity in these revisions means it's much more difficult for anyone to weaponize a law against a neighbor they didn't like, right? Or especially for government officials to weaponize it against a specific population. Now, do you have to be a lawyer to ask these questions? No, you don't. Right? You don't need to be a lawyer. It helps certainly, but you don't have to be a lawyer. And you can ask these questions of the laws that govern you and your location and your municipality and your state and your province and your country. You can be an active citizen. You can participate in not just the process of creating government through election, but being big brother to the government to say, hey, that ain't fair. Here's a suggestion how to fix it. Now, what do we do with this information, right? In my case, I would lobby City Hall. I would lobby my district city councilor to have the law amended. Say, hey, I would like you to put up this modification of section 206-1 and section 206-2 in the city laws. That's how we upgrade our laws to be more inclusive, less vague, more helpful, less likely to be weaponized against us by someone, an unethical politician who has an axe to grind with people maybe who look like me. AI gives us these capabilities. Another use case that's relevant right now in the USA where I live, where there's a big old election cycle coming up, and various parties and groups have released their platform statements, some of which are hundreds of pages long. Am I going to sit here and read, 8 or 900 pages of even the group of people I like, much less the people I don't like? No, but I can load them into a language model like Gemini or like Notebook LM, along with the bio, the biographical prompt, and see which candidates or parties are most closely aligned to my beliefs. I could ask questions of parties and candidates that I don't know, and get good answers. Right? We elect a lot of people in America where I live. We have local officials in our city. We have state officials. We have federal officials. And we all know who the big names are in an election, right? Who's running for the president of the United States. We sometimes know who our senators are. Sometimes we know who our House of Representatives members are at the federal level. We probably don't remember who our state representatives are, and probably don't even remember who our local representatives are. When you have somebody like, the 6th Middlesex County District State Representative, the holder of that office votes on laws that affect me directly, and yet I probably couldn't tell you who they are, what their record is, what they voted for, or against what they're working on. Realistically, that person has way more impact on my life than the big names on the big stages. Shouldn't I know what they're doing? With the power of generative AI, I could, right? So my elected representative at the state level, it just passed or advanced this piece of legislation. This is H4885, which is reforming modernizing Massachusetts firearms laws. So I could go into AI Studio and say, next, evaluate this proposed bill and summarize the changes it makes. I'm going to load up H4885. So I loaded this bill. This is 40,000 words, right? This is a big old chunk of legislation. So I had Gemini go through and summarize what are the things that it changes. It changes a whole bunch of stuff. It changes some things that I personally might agree with, things I might not agree with, but I at least know what's in this thing now. And critically, I'm not relying on someone else telling me their interpretation of it. I'm using machine to extract this data out. And yes, language models have biases for sure, but with good prompting, we can reduce the likelihood of those biases. And in this case, for anything political, I would trust a machine with good prompting over another human being who may or may not have an agenda. So I could now ask and say, so this has gone through, I should probably share my screen. This has gone through and not only done the analysis, but then done an assessment of unintended consequences, impacts on lawful gun owners, gun dealers, law enforcement, social consequences, uncertainty of legal challenges, and so on and so forth. And some of these things are very valid. If you increase the cost of firearm ownership, it decreases the ability for lower income people to purchase them. In the USA, income tends to correlate to social status and to minorities, right? People who are minorities tended to be lower income. So, an unintended consequence of this could be reducing the ability for people who are minorities, who are already disadvantaged, from being able to purchase firearms, right? That may or may not be something you want. Which means then they don't have the ability to defend themselves, and there are definitely people who are marginalized, who are targeted, who are harassed, people, for example, who are transgender. This could reduce their access to tools for self-defense and self-protection. Now, I'm not saying it's going to, but the way the law is written, it's not clear. And of course, Gemini at the bottom there is saying, "Hey, let's do some work on this. Let's make clearer definitions and things." And of course, I could, if I was so interested, have it write those things out and send it to my rep and say, "Let's make these changes in the law instead, please. And here's why. So I can close this loophole. So I can avoid this consequence. So it can not reduce access to self-defense tools for people who have a genuine need for them, particularly in today's crazy climate." That's the power of generative AI. So what do you do next? What's the next steps? Here's what you should do next, what your key takeaways are. First, familiarize yourself with good research AI tools like Google's Gemini, Anthropic Claude, ChatGPT. Google's free notebook LM is, like I showed you earlier, is really good. It's very rigid. I like that one for high risk stuff like law and finance and medicine because it won't return results that it you didn't give it the data for. But it's good to learn how to use these tools for this purpose. Good prompting. Show me citations. Show me exactly where you got this information. Repeat back and cross validate to make sure it's not making things up. Second, get a hold of necessary data. Start with the laws and legislation in your city or your province and start loading those laws into the AI tool of your choice. Write up your concerns and who you are. Write out that biographical statement so that the models can interpret the law appropriately. Digesting down the parts that are relevant to you. Build out your prompts to ask questions you care about. How does this impact you? How could someone misuse it intentionally? What are the unintended consequences? Follow along the prompts that I used in the video. Ask these questions and have real in-depth conversations with these models so you understand what your government is working on and you can participate in the process. Then, once you've got your analysis, take action. Analysis is fine, it's good, it's important. But as we've said at Trust Insights for years and years, analysis without action is distraction. Do something with the knowledge you gain. Suggest legislative changes. Share your findings. Support those people running for office or in office who are aligned with your views and the changes you want to see made. Heck, maybe even run for office yourself now that you have the power of AI on your side. The power to understand, monitor, and challenge your government to improve the quality of its work is yours more than ever now with the power of AI. Politicians can't hide behind gimmicks and gotchas and inside obscure laws, not if you're empowered as a citizen to find them out and call them out using AI to say, "Hey, you wrote this really vague. Maybe you did it on purpose. Maybe there's a certain thing you or a certain group of people you don't like. Let's change that." That power is in your hands. So please use it accordingly. Please use it, period, to improve life and government and our civilization. All right. What else happened this week? This week I did a 5-part series on artificial general intelligence, AGI. I always confuse that with adjusted gross income from taxes, but there's a 5-part series on what it is, how we get there, the promises and perils of it, and the future. So go check that out. Had a lot of fun putting that together. Upcoming jobs for this week. Let's see what we got. We have Adobe Analytics Architect at Saxon Global, Adobe Analytics Specialist at Golden Technology and at Tanisha Systems, Adobe Conversion Lead at Spar Information Systems, Adobe Target Architect at Optomi, Advanced Digital Insights Analyst at Flexton, AEM Architect at CDW, Associate Director of Personalization at Horizontal Talent, Associate Director of Analytics at New Engine, Digital Insights Analyst at Ascendum Solutions, Google Analytics Analyst at Diverse Links, Growth Marketing Manager at FinTech Digital, Insights Analyst at LeadStack, Marketing Analytics Manager at LQ Digital, Marketing Performance and Analytics Analyst at Fin Partners, and Senior Personalization Manager at Cloudflare. So lots of stuff happening there. Upcoming events. We are 45 days out from MACON, the Marketing AI Conference. I'm going to be doing a talk on open models, open weights models, like Llama 3.1, which just came out this past week. I did a short sort of hot take on it, and then Mistral Large 2 came out like a day later. So we're going to be talking a lot about that stuff. Marketing Props B2B Forum here in Boston, Social Media Marketing World in San Diego in April of next year, and a whole cadre of private events and things. So if you are having a corporate retreat, a briefing, etc., those are things I do. So if there's a topic that you want covered, if you want to know more about the use of AI for things, let me know. Just reply to the newsletter. That's going to do it for this week's issue. Thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you on the next one. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And if you want to know when new videos are available, hit the bell button to be notified as soon as new content is live.